After so many transgressions by the unregulated press, surely British press has simply gone too far. And following Lord Levenson's recommendations, what should be done to change the status quo? But perhaps none of this even matters. Maybe the press doesn't really influence British public opinion, and press regulation and press transgressions doesn't matter at all. These are all vital questions in a British democracy in the 21st century, and tonight we'll be discussing them on The Big Question. So first, let me introduce our panelists tonight. For press regulation is Hamad Mirza, a marketing communications student here at Westminster University. Second is Jamie Walsh, a TV production student. The law student, Simon Mills.
Hello.
There are formidable press regulation proposers. And on the counter team against press regulation is Jenny Lambert, a journalism student. Also, Swaba Chopra, I hope I pronounced your name right.
Suba.
I tried. Politics and international relations is her subject. And also Chris Chancellor, a journalism student. Chandler, beg your pardon.
The guy from France.
Like that, our journalism student. So let's kick it off tonight, and I want to start with yourself. Let me try and pronounce your name correctly this time. Chwaba. Suba. I'm sorry. Okay, so I want to start off with you tonight. I mean, after all of the transgressions and excesses of the media, should we be considering regulation? I mean, what is the status quo in terms of the dangers of the excesses of media at the moment?
I don't think that this industry, the media industry, the press industry, could go to an extent to be a danger to us, because there's a reason why the media exists today. Is because we need somebody to voice the public's opinion. So I highly doubt that it's dangerous to us or to our country's international security or somebody's privacy, as a matter of fact. It's a democratic platform where anybody can talk about something with a justified reason.
Simon, I want to go to you. What's your opinion about this?
I think the press goes a bit too far sometimes. In 2008, they published a story that someone was a murderer. Instantly, the public's opinion was that, yes, he's a murderer with no actual evidence. It turned out he had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But for that time, he was completely blacklisted for doing a crime they didn't commit.
Hamad, what do you think about this?
I think it's absolutely right when you say that the press has gone too far. I think it originated quite early. I mean, from the days of Hillsborough, where the Sun decided to publish a lot of their material, and to today as well, where it's just gone too far, where journalists and associates start to chase celebrities. I think it's just a step too far now, and it needs to stop. So we need some sort of regulation.
Jenny, I mean, thinking about a recent example of the Daily Mail's piece on Ralph Miliband, I mean, something like that just shocks the nation, and it's not difficult to understand why people would want regulation when things have got so out of hand.
No, in no circumstance do I defend what the Daily Mail did. They took an opinion piece and targeted a person that died in 1996 and couldn't argue, and they used the same piece to target and scandal Ed Miliband for political purposes. And I think that in terms of that, it was completely wrong and unjustified, and the Daily Mail should have apologised. But I don't think that that's cause for the government to regulate everything that the press publishes. I think that, okay, it was an opinion piece that was taken dramatically out of context and that probably wasn't right, but at the same time, it was an opinion piece and you can't take away someone's opinion.
Chris, what do you think?
The problem is that what Jenny brought up there is that the government attempts to regulate our press. When is it justified that the fate of what is essentially the fourth estate to be placed in the hands of what is very job to critique? It's when journalists are placed, where the fate of a journalist is placed in the hands of the government, that surely is it goes against the entire reason the press and the media itself in the first place. That's at the point where we are being regulated to basically say we can't tell people basically what our government is doing without going through a conduit.
Surely in a democracy, there shouldn't be regulation on free speech at all.
Yes, I agree that there shouldn't be a massive amount of regulation upon free speech, but there is a certain degree to which, especially when we talk about the press, we talk about things like professional newspapers, professional media outlets that people respect and have very high opinion of. So when you take things like that and institutions like that, they should not be instilling, they should have a certain degree of journalistic integrity, and that's, I think, the main issue that you need to police, because with the Daily Star and other incidences like that, there were actions where journalists had acted unethically and with the interest of getting a good story or acting completely selfishly. So I think that is the kind of area we need to be policing, rather than the whole idea of journalism as a force in the media, rather than simply targeting the individuals who are responsible, not just journalism as a huge bracketed media outlet.
I want to take some questions or some comments, rather, from the audience. Who has an opinion about this? Has the media simply gone too far, and is intervention needed? Who has an opinion about this? Go ahead. What's your name?
Ryan Brown. I feel like Ian Hislop in saying that there are already regulation laws in place, like libel, and we have actually, if we take another step too far, then the government will be going too far rather than just the press. And although the press can be unethical, there can be an uprising against them with other people forming their own newspapers and magazines. So it's completely doable. It's true, though, isn't it? I mean, the UK already has restrictions on the press. I mean, in comparison to, for example, the USA, the gentleman mentioned libel laws. We have a much stronger system already. I mean, why would we need any kind of regulation at the moment?
One of the problems there, like libel and defamation, although you can then turn around and sue them and claim damages for what they've said about you, the journalists themselves very rarely actually get into the punishment themselves. It's the paper that will fund the bill.
Do you agree?
It's been proven that the press can't regulate themselves. So I think that, some sort of external organisation, I understand what you mean by saying the government, they have, what would be the point? Is your argument? I agree that it does need to be done by an external organisation, but if they can't regulate themselves, then actions do need to be taken.
Okay. So, Jenny, as a journalist student yourself, how has that informed how you see this debate?
I think that what you say about ethical reasons and the journalist pushing to get the story, and it can sometimes be selfish, is fair. But at the same time, the increased pressure on the journalist comes from the newspaper, and that pressure comes from, the public. People are going more and more towards the internet. People are buying less and less papers. But at the same time, people want those stories. Everything that happened with the Millie Dowler case, the phone hacking was a dreadful incident that was completely morally ableistic, but the public still buys that newspaper, and they bought it because it had that information. So you have to consider that the newspaper has to meet the public demand somehow, and the public's demand has gone higher and higher, especially with all the blogs and the free press on the internet, and it's trying to meet demand, and without the public meeting them halfway in the middle.
When it invades privacy, it becomes an issue.
Pardon?
When it invades privacy, it becomes an issue. It's like Millie Dowler's family.
Yeah, absolutely, it becomes an issue, but the paper was forced to do that because it's competing in an industry that's losing, and it's losing because people are not paying attention to it anymore.
But sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to ask the audience now, who thinks the press has gone too far? Put your hand up if you think the press has gone too far. So I would say that's probably about 50%. Who thinks the press hasn't gone too far? Really, it's okay. We shouldn't even be having this debate. So that's definitely only a handful of people. So, generally people believe there have been excesses. So, I want to hear more of your argument. Jamie, go ahead.
Yes. When you were talking about the Millie Dowler incident, and we have to, when it comes to very sensitive issues like that, we have to distinguish whether or not that was working, whether the journalist was working with something that is in public interest or of interest to the public. There's a very clear definition between that. In public interest is something which is crucial information we need to know about, i.e., terrorism, war, any other.
Who gets to choose?
That's a very good point. Who gets arguably the entirety of the media is chosen for us as audiences, we don't decide what gets made necessarily, although that has changed in the realm of the internet and Kickstarter. That's that whole wing of the argument isn't particularly the point. But yeah.
I mean, looking at the Levinson inquiry and the evidences that we heard, there were some shocking cases in there. And how are those kinds of abuses meant to stop without regulation?
I'd like to say something about that, and also try and convince those 50% people who just said that, in the audience who just said that the press has gone too far. That first of all, we've been given free speech, so there is bound to people are bound to make false statements. People are bound to have misunderstandings. The power is always misused if it's given to anybody. But I think it's be unethical to shoot the messenger who's actually bridging the gap between our leaders and the public, and having regulations for the press. I mean, if the government does it, it'll be a very biased opinion. And if we have an external body, who's going to elect that external body? How are we so sure that they won't be impartial to both sides of the opinion? So, again, like, why does one think that the press has gone too far when it hasn't?
Who thinks the press has gone too far? Who feels very, very passionately about that? Okay, I want to speak to you. What's formulated that opinion?
To be honest, in my opinion, I think the young lady mentioned shooting the messenger. In my opinion, it's there's a difference between a messenger and a spy, and that's the way I see it. I see the press is more kind of spying on the public and as well as on people in the public eye. That's what I think it's going for.
You mean the cases of the sort of paparazzi following Harry Potter author and things like this?
Etc. Like phone tapping as well, phone hacking, etc. All of those stories that come up, I think that's kind of gone too far.
But they are a small minority, and they're already being dealt with criminally now.
It's a small minority, but as one panelist said before, it's the newspapers who get punished, not the journalists themselves.
I want to go to Jenny, back to you. Talk more about why you think that regulation, given this context, is a bad idea.
I'm not completely opposed to the idea of regulation. I'm opposed to the idea of government regulation. I think that it's hypocritical of the government to get out of the Levinson inquiry what Lord Levinson said. He said that there should be regulation, but he said that it should come from within the industry. It should come within newspaper professionals. And the government have turned that on its head and said, no, we want to create the laws. We want to come up with what you can do and what you can't do. And at no point is anybody that's ever worked in the industry ever allowed to be a part of that. They've said very clearly that no editor or former editor is ever allowed to be on the panel to change or come up with any ideas or regulations, which is preposterous because the government don't work in the industry. They're politicians. They're not newspaper writers. They're not editors. So why should they get to decide?
Jamie, I wanted to ask you, I mean, there already is regulation, isn't there? Because media, the news and the press, it's a free market and people won't buy stuff which they disagree with, no? Is that not the case?
Well, yes, people tend, the reason that you would buy or subscribe to a particular ideology, like a specific newspaper, because it would appeal to your own beliefs. Most people tend not to look at something that challenges their beliefs. They tend to go for something that reinforces what they already think about a certain issue, like they go to a right-wing or a left-wing newspaper or the other way around. But just going briefly back on what I mentioned about press regulation, about the ideas that press regulation has already been established, the cost for opening a libel case against a major newspaper is staggeringly huge. I mean, most normal people, like the McCanns, for instance, would not be able to simply just get up the money. It costs something ridiculous like £100,000 to even open a libel case against a major newspaper. The cost is astronomical, even if you win.
Let's I'm going to cut you off there, sorry about that, but let's talk now materially about what should be done to address the excesses. As we saw, most of the audience certainly think there have been excesses. I want to go to you first, Chris. Mm-hmm. Accepting there is a problem, what should be done about it?
The problem is with defining what should be done about this is that with any topic like this, you're opening a veritable can of worms in a sense. Like electing a board of representatives to regulate the press, as it was said, but who says who's going to elect these people? What political sway are they going to have? What political party are they going to align to? What interests are they going to bring? That's always going to be the problem, because if you have something that's going to regulate or give the decisions to something that's supposed to be free and supposed to be open, then that's not going to work. And there was the concept that we should have the difference between an accredited journalist and a non-accredited journalist. That's putting journalists on a pedestal that doesn't need to exist. Like, if we are meant to be a conduit for the people from the highest reams to whoever wants to read the newspaper or whatever publication you're looking at. If we have someone that have two tiers of journalism, I don't really see the point there that citizen journalism will collapse in that sense. Being told who can publish and who can't publish, that just makes no sense to me. And that's the problem. I don't have any idea what should be done, although I do admit of course there have been discrepancies. We're not a shameless industry by any remit, but that's the problem. There is no real solution.
Yeah, Simon, I want to go to you because you're for regulation. What should the regulation look like? Who should be doing it? Why do they have the authority to do it?
Well, I don't agree with the Levinson inquiry that it should be like a government thing. I don't think there should be any more statute. But at the same time, I don't think it should be regulated by the press themselves as well. They do need an independent body. And yes, I think it should be helped by the press. I think kind of former editors should have an insight into it because they know the business, they know how it works. So they've got a bit more understanding of it. Although it needs an impartial body, they're not going to know everything about it.
So something like Ofcom, but for the press.
Yeah.
Would that be that would suit your needs?
Yeah.
What about yourself?
I think I would agree. An independent body which understands the industry but doesn't have a connection with the industry. I think that's the problem because journalism is such a tightly knit, and when you actually look at all the different editors for different papers, it's actually ridiculous how few people it actually is, all these major journalists. But severing journalists from the journalist community would be very difficult. So keeping them completely impartial would be exceedingly hard. But I think it could be theoretically possible to kind of have a journalist that wasn't part of a journalism industry, if that makes sense.
I mean, any kind of actual proper regulatory body. I mean, it's going to make this country, people are going to say they're not really a democracy. There's interference when there shouldn't be. There will always be some interference.
I think there is interference in every element of everything. I mean, it just depends how people go about it. I mean, it would make sense for an independent organisation to regulate the press, but then again, you know, there could be things that could alter with that. So it needs to be looked on from a perspective that, you know, what the press can do about it and what the press can't do about it, and who has an influence in that organisation, so that there can be no like sort of coercion in a way.
Does that make you real?
I'm sorry, but what he was trying to say here was, let's have an organization with people who are journalists but not part of that industry. I mean, you asked if that made sense. Sorry, it didn't make sense to me. I mean, first of all, why do have regulation? That's the big question. When this industry is actually telling us the truth, is the reality, and we face it. I mean, I'm in politics and IR student, and I read about politicians and I read about instances. I mean, we wouldn't have found out about all of that. We wouldn't have known about our history today if it weren't for the media. I mean, we talk about how far it's gone. I mean, it's good if it's gone that far, because that's we've got to know we have our knowledge through the media today. I mean, I think all politics and IR journalism students, we log on to our news channels every morning to see what's up to date. If we put those regulations, I'm not sure if we can really think that information is legit.
What about these stories that are wrong, though? When people
That's exactly. That's why I said before. This is this free speech. So there could be a misunderstanding. There could be a false statement made. But
what about invasion of privacy?
But I think that there are privacy laws. I'm sorry to say there are privacy laws.
I don't think the press abide by the privacy laws.
Sorry?
I don't think the press abide by the
Of
privacy laws.
course it does. I'm sure it does. I mean, if you talk about entertainment journalism, yeah, there's a reason when we have celebrities and stars. There's a reason they've become celebrities and stars because of publicity. They use the media to have a name. So why, when they become so famous and then their privacy is invaded, they're having a problem with that because they asked for it in the first place.
Some people become famous or they become infamous, and they shouldn't have. You were mentioning earlier, I think it was off camera, the example of a guy who was branded murderer and actually he never touched anyone at all. It was just a mistake. I mean, what I want to do though is ask you, Jamie, surely in a democracy, to have a free press is important, and you have to accept that of course there will always be some examples and instances where journalists go too far, but you have to admit that as a sacrifice to maintain the independence.
I do agree that independence in the journalism industry and the free press as an ideal is something very important to us to strive to. I mean, the government expenses scandal would not have been uncovered if it weren't for a journalist snooping around and having a look in places where he probably shouldn't have been. But that was something that the public needed to know. Exactly. It was of public interest. And very similarly with the Edward Snowden files. The fact that the NSA was spying on American citizens is a massive, important part of the most free country in the world is spying on its own citizens. Oh, God. So, big deal. So, I'm very much, when it comes to the idea of press regulation, like Jenny, I'm very much against government regulation, and I am all for the idea of free press, but specifically, like when we say the press, who do we mean exactly? Do we mean professional journalists? Do we mean the paparazzi? Do we mean online bloggers? And when it comes to like the idea of a journalistic license, does that mean that people who write stuff on Blogger about cats, do they have to buy a license to put stuff on Blogger about cats?
That's a good question. I mean, what do our audience members think? Serious bloggers, for example, who maybe even make some money from blogging, should they be subject to the sorts of things that accredited professional journalists are? And who has... Yeah, go ahead.
No, they shouldn't.
Sorry, hold on a second. Go ahead.
I don't think they should. The reason being because anyone can make a blog, anyone with any opinion can make a blog. You don't have to take it seriously. You look at a newspaper, you take it a little bit more seriously than you would a blog. I think the fact that you can make a blog and you can express your opinion, whoever you are, is important. It's imperative that we keep that as it is. You know, it's the same with anything like, you know, social media. You know, we shouldn't pay for it. You know, it should always be free so that it's available for a universal demographic.
Okay. I want to take your comment as well. Go ahead.
I kind of agree with him, and also with the guys that are talking about privacy and independence of the media. But what we actually got to look at is the control of the media. Since 1986, there was like 50 corporations that control the media. Now there's 6. Who is actually going to benefit from the news? Why is it that 6 people, they have to control it? In a sense, they have to spread their views, their shared opinions about whatever's happening around the world. When it comes to independent journalists, they also have to like earn a living. We're talking about whatever, you've got the big journalists who are earning like big money, yeah? But what about everybody else? They ain't going to get their voices heard. You look at Facebook, yeah? Like you've got them regulating how much people view a certain Facebook pages, posts, but nothing, media, free press, freedom of speech has completely died out. So we've got to kind of be realistic, but at the same time, we've got to keep on pushing forward. Whatever the government does, whatever control there is, we've got to just keep on standing up to it.
Chris, let me go back to you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Well,
how do you reply to them?
The idea of like that there's a system where, although there are media companies that do control the entirety of a certain level of media, like Time Warner own, I think it's over like 200 like media outlets underneath their own name. But in the same instance, we've had these, as we were talking about over here, we have these people that are bringing information to the public constantly. Without these outlets, without these things, and people wouldn't, of course, if you found out about the expenses scandal. People would never have found out about that if it exactly wasn't for journalists probably prying into business. That's our job. That's the point of journalists. They're supposed to find out these discrepancies that people are making. Undoubtedly, as I said, we're not a shameless industry. We're not a shameless industry.
Yeah, go ahead, Howard.
Rupert Murdoch, he owns a third of the media.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to say that it makes things seem more credible if it comes from one of them sources. But I mean, if something doesn't come out the way it intends to, I mean, who is to blame? I mean, for example, independent journalists, they're not as credible as a journalist for someone from like The Sun, for example. And I mean,
but not everyone will see it like that, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I mean, a journalist from The Sun may have less journalistic integrity than someone who blogs online, who they do more thorough research. The Sun guy might just be coasting on the fact that he works for The Sun, working as a journalist, and yeah, sorry?
No, I was going to say that this is presumed, the presumption there is that quality journalism with research is the ideal standard. But if you look at what's actually sold in terms of newspapers, you can see that obviously people don't necessarily want proper journalism. They'd rather see what you might call rubbish.
How do you define proper journalism?
Exactly.
What is good journalism?
So then how can you regulate it?
I think the gentleman in the audience had a good point when he said that roughly 6 or 7 people, they dominate the whole of the organization. If this was to be broken down in a way that people could see, you know, because people in Rupert Murdoch's situation, they have a lot of power. You know, they can press a lot of people in the organization. For example, the staff, the journalists, he can pressure them to do, you know, basically whatever he tells them to do. So if these things were broken down, then maybe regulation wouldn't even be needed because there wouldn't be that pressure and that competitiveness that was mentioned before.
So if the power was basically the power of deciding what happens in these industries was split up.
Yeah, if the hierarchy was broken down, then
it would have to go past more people, therefore more different ideas.
Exactly.
Different
Someone disagrees with you. Let's hear what he has to say.
If you break down the media and make it individual, then they wouldn't have any power against the government, and the government would soon dissolve them individually. It would definitely happen.
Individual people have power over the government.
If
people who lead revolutions have power over the government.
Not unless it's in a collective. You have to have people in one group, otherwise they get picked off one by one. That's a fact.
I think if the government was attempting to shut down different media outlets, people would know about it. I think if the government was basically press ganging different individuals and media organisations, people would whistleblow about that massively, and then everyone would turn on the government.
If people have a similar opinion on something, what they do is they tend to form an organisation, or they tend to form a league, and they generate forward from that way onwards. I mean, you can't have.
A lot of people have the same.
Yeah, Jenny, I wanted to go to Jenny. I mean,
well, then should create their own organisation.
I want to move on now. Jenny, you're against regulation, but you know, we're talking about Rupert Murdoch and etc. But I mean, he's got enough money. He's not going to be worrying about fines when it comes to regulation, is he?
No, he's not. But at the same time, he was in charge of News of the World, and he dealt with that accordingly. He wasn't complaining about money. He was saddened by the loss of his newspaper, and whether you believe that he knew what was going on or not, I mean, I can't say that I don't believe that he knew what was going on. But it doesn't. I don't think money comes into it. I don't think that's a part of it. I think the fact is that it's free speech, and like he said, if you break down the conglomerates, the corporate conglomerates, so if you took away what Rupert Murdoch has, I mean, for instance, he wanted to buy B-Sky B and he wasn't allowed to. They didn't want to give him that power, but if you took that away from him and broke it down, things wouldn't work. Newspapers are diminishing anyway, even when a lot of people own them, and if you break that down, they're all going to fail. No one's going to have an opportunity to say what they think because everyone's going to be fighting with each other, and it's going to be worse, not better.
Hamad, I want to go to you because in this final segment we're going to be talking about if any of this even matters. I mean, does the press, and I'm not talking just about the newspapers now, but also about the media in general, think, you know, TV journalism as well, does the press actually have any real decisive effect on public opinion? I mean, does any of this actually really matter? This is the last segment. Go ahead.
It does matter because the things that the media portray, the stories that the media release, the TV media releases, I mean, it has an influence on what people think, you know. If the BBC was to publish an article tomorrow or to say something in the news tomorrow about something, a subject, you know, people they're gonna believe that, you know. So we need to find a fine line between, you know, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Does anyone disagree with you? Okay, go ahead.
I'd just like to mention that there's a lot of alternative media out there that you can actually research and look up yourself. You don't always have to conform to the mainstream media like the BBC, like really, really big names in media. You can look to other sources.
Yeah, I mean, I find this personally fascinating myself because I'm an independent journalist and I try and provide coverage which is very deliberately alternative to the mainstream. And in a way, I kind of wonder whether or not, and this is a bit naughty of me coming back to the last question, but if regulation would be of any effect anyway, because these days the platforms are much more democratic. Really, anyone can, through setting up a blog by themselves, can become a journalist. So, I mean, these days, talking about the press having an effect on public opinion, it's not really as simple as that, is it? Yeah, go ahead.
As much as we back in the 1920s, obviously we did have broadcasting the press had a huge effect on public opinion. That was back when all we had were there was a line between amateurism and professionalism. Nowadays, that line has been broken down. There's a sort of a fading line between amateurism and professionalism. As it was said, the gentleman over there are so many alternative news outlets. We don't have to take at face value anything we get from broadcasting, anything we get from press.
Yeah, but I mean, on the other hand, it is true, isn't it? Because if you think about, for example, the build-up to the Iraq War, or build-up to, I don't know, for example, the intervention in Libya, obviously, I mean, it's life and death what the British public think about foreign policy issues now, and that is dominated by what gets pumped out in the mainstream media. Do you see it like that?
But surely in that case, like you said, it's you have got independent journalists and then you've got the big broadcasters like the BBC, and people can read a story on a different perspective of each. But if somebody wants to know what is true, they're lazy in terms of they wait and rely on the BBC to say it. But if people were proactive, they could read an amateur journalist, and they could
just make a quick point.
Yeah, go on.
For example, the BBC they might have reported on the Iraq War, they might have reported on Libya, they might have reported on Syria. But the thing is, when there's a lot of social media aspects out there, there's a lot of journalists who are in them countries who will be reporting. But the thing is, the journalists who are reporting on behalf of the BBC, that is what mainly what the people see. You know, not everyone's going to take a proactive stance and go and look in depth for these things, for these independent journalists who are reporting it from their view from that country.
Well, in that case, that's fine, but they should complain that all they have is the BBC. If they don't want to be proactive, then they can't moan about what they're given.
No, but if that material isn't there, then what do? They have to look to a mainstream body.
I'm not saying that the BBC wouldn't be there, but they have the option for both. And I'm saying that people can be lazy and just rely on the BBC, but then they criticise the big broadcasters for doing things wrong.
Can I just make a quick point?
Yeah.
Shubo had something to say first.
Yeah, I think about talking about blogs and like social media, I think we're confusing ourselves with journalism and with social media. And we are thinking, because social media is where anybody can, even like, I'm not talking about journalists, but like anybody can voice their opinions, and governments and like people have problems with that and they want to regulate that bit, but they're blaming everything on journalism. And for example, focusing on BBC or anything else, there's a reason why there are so many journalists. There's a reason why people like Harry are freelance journalists and they can say whatever they want to. And it's totally up to the public if they want to listen to that or not. That's why there's democracy here. They can agree to it or they can't. They can disagree to it. So
it seems as though independent journalists, what they seem to do is they tend to share their material through social media channels. So if that wasn't available, then there'd be a big gap that's missing. So the important thing is that social media is there for everyone who is an independent journalist, who might be uncredited or credited, but they'll have more of a say, and they should be able to share their opinion to more people rather than just a selective few.
Jamie's itching.
Yes, I've scratched a bit. But no, I'd just like to kind of offer a rebuttal, if I may, to the point that if people can be lazy and look at the BBC, or if they want to be more proactive, they can look at independent journalists like yourself. What I would like to say is that all news as a format is constructed as a packaged information appealing to a particular ideology based on the person who wrote it. As you could say that on a subconscious level, you could say to any point that you say that what you write, your ideas don't influence what you write, but even on a subconscious level, that is going to impact what you have to say and your slant on it, your opinion on something. Even if you're being very factual, you are interpreting something that you saw yourself to other people who weren't there. So it's like trying to paint a picture for someone and then you're trying to describe it. Exactly, it's based on trust.
That's why people watch the BBC.
That's why people watch it, because they have a particular
In that case,
reputation.
It's either either you get that, even if it is factual, you get it, or you don't get it at all. Where is the middle ground here? Either you get the information that is sent to you in a Reuters news package, for example, that is sent to like press offices, press releases, or that is just simply not reported at all. How can we regulate the ability to write of the journalists? How can we regulate how they report? We can't.
What do our audience think? Put your hand up if you think that British public opinion is very much informed by the press and the news media. I do. I guess that's most people. A little bit timid hands, not quite up in the sky, but I guess that's most people. Most people in the audience think that that is such an influence. Hamad, go on.
I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the majority of what people see is influenced by what they are received as information and as news. So.
But is that necessarily a bad thing? That's the point of news, to inform people.
Yeah, but when you're telling full stories, when you're when you're explaining things that aren't in the public interest, then what's the point?
Once again, that we have expressed that these occasions are a very small minority of stories that are actually taken through the press filter, like the people that fact check, that there's an entire department in every news media outlet to fact check something. If something slips through, that's a very small minority of thing that actually occurs. And people make mistakes, unfortunately. That's what people do. It's unfortunate.
I just want to say, the media is not always right. The media can make something factual. If they want to make it factual, they find any excuse to make it factual. Watching BBC is different than watching Channel 4. Like, every news has their own opinion on the way they actually take it out there, the way they import it to you guys is different in every way. Like, in Channel 4, they might say a different headline to BBC, and it's up to, like you said, it's up to the public to see which one they believe. However, if you want to make something factual, they'll make it factual in any way possible. It could be a lie, it could be a half lie. However, they'll make it so they can be it could be a fact to them.
But do you think that people actually have sort of the time in their lifestyles to really think and compare the different channels, or are they just addicted to their favourite channel and they just sort of believe everything?
Some people are stuck on BBC, some people will change wherever, and then they'll have a bigger insight to the news itself. However, watching the news is not always the right thing to do, because the way they implement it towards you, it's someone can be, they won't know anything about the news. Just watching that little bit of the news, they'll think, oh, this is right, this is wrong, or whatever. So it's just the way that they convey it to you. The news is not always right.
Okay, that makes absolute sense. Coming over here now. What's your name? What do you think?
Charlie. So isn't that the point, instead of regulation, isn't it defining what actual good journalism is? It's not, you're saying the press as a whole, but within that press there are obviously good journalists that we know. And it's obvious, the newspapers you guys are bringing up today are the Daily Mail and the Star and the Sun. It's not good journalism, we know. Like, their front page is more about Wayne Rooney rather than politics or anything actually that's going to affect our lives. So you're talking about regulation and you can say that that's important, but isn't it more about the redistribution of the media and choosing good journalists than having 100 newspapers and blaming the 50 that are terrible?
Well, that's a very good question. Respond to that if you will.
The problem with papers like The Sun, it's not so much newsworthy anymore. It is just social entertainment. It's just applying to the masses, even if a lot of it's just crap.
Yeah, Hamad.
I think that.
I just wanted to say that we're going to start. I want to hear your general position on these questions now in the final few moments. So, I mean, could you just generally touch on the supposed excesses, what you think should be done about it? Obviously, you're pro-regulation, but specifically what you, Hamad, think should be done about it, and put that in the context of the importance of the media. Have a minute.
As regulation goes, I mean, I wouldn't know exactly how to go about something like that. fair enough, a government organisation wouldn't be very great. Fair enough, you know, an external government organisation is subject to, you know, is subject to external influence. So I just think that everyone, like you said, everyone doesn't need to take a moment to appreciate the good journalists that are out there, and you know, disregard the bad social entertainment media aspect of, you know, the press. So I think that it needs to be, I don't know, I think it needs to be implemented from the top down and not, you know, the bottom up, because, you know, the controlling organizations do have a big influence, a very big influence on what people hear, what they see, and what they receive as information, and how they go about their lives. You know, it will affect their political views, their religious views, and it will affect everything that they do.
Chris, give us your general position, summarize your argument.
The main problem that I have with this entire debate about press regulation is the fact is, even the people, like for example, we had an entire inquiry by a Lord Chief Justice and nothing can be agreed on. It's unfortunate that we have the concept that we can't regulate ourselves, but as the lady said over there, there's like the 50 journalists, 50 papers, 50 journalists that are ruining it for the rest of us, essentially. The people that they strive for quality journalism. And it's unfortunate, as I already said, people make mistakes, and there are just some genuinely bad people that exist in the world, unfortunately, and how are we to regulate an entire industry and an entire body for just a couple of bad apples, basically?
That's very clear. Schubert, summarize your position for us.
What I really think is that the media hasn't gone too far, first of all. That's my clear statement to everybody. Because we need somebody to know, somebody to tell us what exactly is happening in this world. Not everybody can go and witness and tell us and report about wars and about all the other things. And the media is actually safeguarding our democracy, so I don't see what the problem with that is. And yeah, I think that's it.
I want to go to you, Jamie. You know, you can reply to those comments, but just summarize your position for us.
Just my immediate reply to that comment is, we get the truth, but at what cost? The cost of several people's livelihoods, possibly, maybe the cost of someone's integrity as a person. But anyway, my general statement would be that I do believe in some cases that the press, and specifically some of the paparazzi, like Chris was saying, it's the minority spoiling it for the majority of the image that is the press and the journalism industry. There are some amazingly talented and well thought out and very, very clever people working in the journalism industry who are doing their best to give us the true, unbiased picture that they can. So I feel, like Hamad was saying, it should be a top-down process of the companies weeding out those sects or those particular journalists who are being unethical, who are causing these problems within the journalism industry, and they should annex them, just remove them straight away. Yes, they might lose a couple of top-paid journalists, but at the same time, it will just improve the process. It'll improve the process a lot.
Jenny, what's your general position on all of these issues to summarise tonight?
I think that you know, some form of regulation does need to happen, but under no circumstance should that come from the government. I think that journalists, perhaps not those still working in the industry, former editors that, ironically, the government have banned from having anything to do with this, I think that they should come up with not regulations, but just kind of an ethical and a moral status that should then be backed up by legislation and agreed by everybody, and that when that's put forward, that those journalists that can't adhere to that should not work as journalists anymore. But I think that you can't regulate it in terms of telling people what to say. I think you should just remake the ethical and the moral issues, just make sure that they're clear.
Simon, you have the last word of the panelists. Go ahead and summarise your position.
Definitely there is a call for a regulation. I agree, definitely not government. I don't think they should have their hand in it. But I do think that the actual journalists need to be held accountable for what they write. Because if they're not investigating it properly, then I think they should be forced to come out and say, oh, I've done this wrong, and they should be punished.
Absolutely, that's why, you know, the moral and the ethical things are there. But
I would say that it should also help to protect journalists as well. So if they are doing their job properly and, say, investigating governments for the expenses scandal, I think they should be protected at the same time.
You know, we've practically run out of time now, but there are a few audience members who have vibrant questions and lots of energy they wish to continue with the debate, but the debate will have to continue online. I'll just give you the hashtag again. It's hashtag the big debate, and you can mention WMinSmokeTV. You know, just for what it's worth, my position is that there shouldn't be official regulatory bodies, because I think that in today's Britain, the definition of news, the definition of journalism is fast evolving, and that regulation couldn't really catch up with who is a journalist anymore anyway. And I think that, you know, if we're going to be seriously a British democracy in the 21st century, that regulation by even serious independent recognized perhaps bodies is wrong, let alone government interference. But I just think that there is already, there should already be, and there is obviously among some sectors, self-regulation, which really should be doing the job. And at the end of the day, people, I think, vote with their buck or their pound, and that's the essential regulation in a free market news market. I mean, if you want, we have a minute left, so if anyone disagrees with me, go ahead. I mean,
yeah, I can agree with that.
You're not allowed to disagree with me on that. No, but I mean, do you agree with me, actually?
Yeah, most of it. I think people are possibly too swayed by what they read in the paper. I mean, the Sun claimed after the last elections that because they've changed from supporting Labour as Conservative, the Conservatives won. And arguably, it's a fair point. If a paper is biased, and someone who's been reading that paper their entire life, they will listen to that opinion.
I think this is why there can't be a government organisation that runs a regulation, because each newspaper, they have a political association. So there's no way that would ever work if there was government regulation in the newspapers, because, you know, how would that affect, you know, the newspaper's stance on political views?
You know, I'm just thinking, just in those last few seconds, part of me disagrees with myself so violently. You know, after the Iraq War, with the lies that were pumped in the media, and that cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, there should be ultimate accountability for those journalists that presume to be the gatekeepers of truth in modern Britain. So the debate will continue in my mind, and hopefully in yours, and online as well. Thank you very much for joining us on tonight's The Big Debate.